Welcome back to the Intuition Incubator. Today, I have with me Dr. Sandra Solano, MD and MS, originally from Bogota, Colombia. She's a healthcare professional with 30 years of experience as a healthcare executive and consultant. Sandra practices in New Albany, Ohio, where she promotes integrative health and wellness, merging her extensive background in public health with holistic approaches to empower individuals, teams, and organizations to manage stress, conflict, and challenges through emotional self-regulation. As a certified HeartMath master trainer, Dr. Solano has coached and trained new trainers for Fortune 500 companies and some of the largest healthcare systems in the United States. Welcome, Dr. Sandra.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Javi. I'm really excited to have this time with you.
Yes, me too. So I would love to hear, what brought you on this journey, because it sounds like you started, what kind of doctor were you? What was your practice?
So actually, my specialization is in preventive medicine and public health. So I always wanted to address the problems in our health from the system perspective, try to fix those things that used to be called the social determinants of health, how our environment influences our health and how the things that we do with our body influences our health. So that was the typical public health approach. And I did that for at the state level with so many agencies and working with large healthcare systems for about, I think it was like 18 years. And then I burned out. And then like most people that burn out, then I'm like, well, it's the job, it's the people. They just don't let me grow. They just don't understand. Like there was so much that I assigned to what I was doing. So after taking some time to recover, then I found another way to do public health, which was to work at the community level. And initially I was like, oh, now I'm really doing public health. I work in Appalachia here in Ohio, implemented mental health prevention programs and obesity prevention programs. And I did that for 9 years and it was amazing. And I burned out.
Yeah.
Because I'm an overachiever. So I had to do it a couple of times. And I really was waking up exhausted, going to bed even more exhausted, and wondering how I was going to do it again the next day. The word work burnout did not even exist. It was just there's something wrong with me because why I'm this exhausted. And I felt like I was faking my life and people were going to find out that I was not able to perform what they wanted me to perform in any role, family, work.
Faking your life in what way? Like, how do you mean?
So I felt like people were looking at me for expertise and competence that I did not have the energy to be able to deliver. That I felt I was just like doing the very minimum for these communities, that I could have been doing so much more if I had the energy. So it felt like I was really faking it.
Yeah, I get it.
And in my family, I had everybody outside would have thought I had it all. I had career, a family. I joke saying that I even have the dog. Yeah. Like I had it all. But I was not even feeling connected to my children. I was not feeling joyful of being a mother. I was not feeling joyful within my marriage. And I was having a number of physical issues that required medications. My med list was a pretty long page.
Wow.
I had medical problems constantly. So I was trying to find a way to feel better. I did not give up hope that there was another way of living that did not feel like this. And that's how I met and saw all these techniques and tools. And especially with HeartMath, I was very skeptical because even though there was scientific data, I am a scientist, I'm a physician, and it did not seem like what they were saying was matching what I had learned in my training. I could not believe that this had anything to do with the heart.
As a doctor, it wasn't matching your training, but your training as a doctor. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I was very resistant and skeptical. And out of pure stubbornness, that like, I'm going to demonstrate that this has nothing to do with this. I started practicing
Oh,
just to be like, well, yeah, I feel good, but that doesn't have anything to do with the heart. And just within weeks, my physical symptoms started getting better. My emotional experience of life started shifting.
yeah.
I started feeling more authentic. I started having more moments of joy. And that's when I became very interested and I started doing everything possible to learn why is this working.
Yeah, yeah. And you are kind of known in the HeartMath community as like the scientist, the one that sort of dives in and studies everything. And if there's a research question, we go to you to find out, is this true? Is this real? Um, so what happened next? Like what was that like for you? I mean, I know for me, for sure, I can so relate to feeling like an imposter, feeling like people are coming to you for expertise and you feel like you are literally like just barely getting out of bed in the morning. And I know that is such a common experience. I think particularly for women, um, we look really good. We're able to really put on a really good facade, but are just, barely holding on sometimes. So what happened when you began to see like, okay, well, this is working, like something is changing?
hmm So, as a good scientist, I started seeking all the research about it. And I decided to become a trainer with zero intention to share with anybody. I wanted to be a trainer because that was the highest level of training and that I was going to actually learn how this works. And I still show up with a little bit of, I'm going to catch the trick. And there's something that has nothing to do with what they're saying. And you went through the training and it's a beautiful journey. It was a journey of transformation to become a trainer. And I went through some of the most difficult times. And at that moment, I had just divorced and there were custody issues. And there is a part of the training that's called the teach back, where you have to go and teach what you learn.
Mhm.
And 15 minutes before the teach back, I got a call letting me know that my daughter was not feeling safe at school because my ex-husband was showing up to pick her up and he had at that time had a lot of custody of her.
Mm.
And she's texted me and I'm calling the school. And you can imagine in those moments where everybody's in crisis, I could not imagine a more painful thing to go through and not being in town to be able to deal with it. I was in Washington, D.C. And then I found myself going to the tools. It's like, okay, I need to be coherent. I need to really be able to listen to my heart intelligence. I need to know what is going to be the best for the family right now and be able to execute that within 10 minutes.
Mm.
And then walk into that room, because that was our break, and deliver my unit. And I did not deliver faking
Mhm.
being okay.
Yeah.
I deliver it really just loving everybody in the room and loving what these tools were doing for me in that moment. And at the end of that teach back, I'm like, I have to do this for a living. People need this in their lives. They need these skills, and it's a trainable skill. And to be able to handle the worst of your moments in the best physiology, in the best capacity that you may have in that moment. I felt like it was discovering the cure of cancer or something. So from there on, has been a journey to discover more about me, discover more about my capacity of loving and compassion, and be more and more authentic and vulnerable every day.
Yeah, it's the experience, right? You had that experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so funny because a couple of weeks ago, my son, he called me like right after he left for the bus stop, and I knew something was very wrong. And I just started freaking out. I'm like, what happened? What happened? And I jet down to where he was, and he had fallen and hurt himself. And before that, I was running around the house like a crazy person, like, hey Siri, trying to find my phone. And as soon as I looked at him, I could see that he needed to be regulated. Like, he was in shock. And it reminded me, oh, I have to be regulated. So we started doing HeartMath together, right? And it was like, okay. So that experience of realizing that, like, the worst things can be happening, and you can regulate yourself in that moment, and it's going to give you access to different options of how to walk through it. And on that note, speak to us about how this relates to intuition.
Well, so intuition, I call it sources of information. There's many sources of information for what we call intuition. It's a sense of knowing, and we don't know how we know. And in HeartMath, we talk about 3 different types of intuition. One is the implicit knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So implicit knowledge are things that you collect through your subconscious, and the brain at the moment may have not determined it to be important, but is keeping track of that. It's also, we learn through pattern observation. The brain is mostly a pattern detector. And then it becomes our work experience, right? When we just are recording patterns we're not even aware of that allow us to predict an outcome. So all that is implicit knowledge. I like to joke that I know a lot of stuff, but I never know where I read it, how do I know it, who said it. So I can never credit anything as mine because probably came from implicit knowledge. And then we have that energetic intuition, that kind of feeling the energy in the environment around us, that we all have that capacity. When the first time I heard all this, it sounded a little bit magic. I'm like, yeah, what do you mean? Like, until you start thinking about times when you receive environment information.
Yeah.
For example, going into a meeting room that's even empty, and you can sense like, oh, something happened here. Something really bad happened here. Or you are able to sense that somebody may be having a hard time, even if you're not seeing them. You're just around them, and you just can sense something is wrong, something is off. So when we start to share an example, so like, well, I guess that, yeah, we can detect energetic information in the environment. And then the third one, which completely sounded like woo-woo crazy to me, was non-local intuition.
Right.
And non-local intuition is when we know things about things that are not immediately in our environment, like distance or time. Like we can sense something. But again, being a mother, actually, I was very familiar with knowing something happened to one of my children. Mm-hmm. Even I wasn't there with them. Like it just have that, like, something happened.
Yeah.
So I had experience of non-local intuition, but I could not explain it scientifically. So it was not something I was bringing to my consciousness. So one of the things I love was the experiments that some universities and HeartMath have run to actually show the fact that our system is able to detect information beyond what we think that our brain is able to detect. And that was very compelling research. And at that point, I think that even though it challenged my structure of the world, at the same time, it matched my experience. So I was a little bit more open.
Yeah.
To be able to accept that there is something maybe that when we need information that is coming to us from somewhere. So I have done a lot of reading about this, and I have my own theories and separate from HeartMath explanation, because HeartMath tries to be very clean. They have empiric experiments. We see this happens. The heart is detecting something before the brain is aware of it, and even before a computer is randomly generating something and making a choice, the heart somehow knows what the computer choice is going to be. So that was mind-blowing. And also
you're
the
referring
fact
to the study where the people were looking at images on a computer, and they were tracking their heart rate variability at the same time. And the heart rate variability showed a shift before the image on the screen popped up.
Yes, 4 to 7 seconds before.
So it was like a joyful image or a upsetting image. And they could predict what image was going to come up next by looking at the heart rate variability of the person who was doing it before the image showed up.
Correct. Yes.
Crazy.
Which, I mean, mind-blowing.
Yeah, crazy.
Right?
Like, how do you deny that?
Exactly. And then people is like, well, how that happens? And HeartMath is very clear. Well, we know it happens. We don't offer any explanations of how is that we can access that extra information from the heart. But when you put all of them together, what is powerful is coherence, which is that physiological state where we can synchronize our heart and our brain.
Yeah.
When we are in that physiological state, in all the experiments have shown that your access to that implicit knowledge increases. Your access to your energetic sensitivity increases. And like you mentioned in this experiment, your access to that non-local information increases. So that creates the opportunity for us to access intuition on demand. We don't have to wait until we just kind of come to us, but we are able to access it in the moment intentionally by switching our physiology into that coherent state.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you have a question?
It also really points to how much more powerful we are than we realize. Like the capacity we have inside ourselves. When we started by your talking about how you felt that, you were burnt out and whatnot, and it must be the job. And so you went to another job and all of these things. And, what we're coming around to now is that like, there's like this superpower inside that if it can do that, like, wow, and we're spending time looking outside ourselves to find the solution, and we're completely unaware of the power that's inside to find the solution.
Correct. And even if you think that power may be coming from somewhere else, like somewhere spiritual or something outside you or bigger than you, what I focus is in the fact that we can create the body state, that we have that power to create the body state to access the information more effectively.
Physiologically.
And when we need it.
Yeah, we can shift our brain and body physiologically to access that state when on demand.
Correct. So, and that is a trainable skill that we all can learn to do that. That is not something that you have to be a magic meditator for 20 years and being able to do it. That we really can do it. And the power that brings is so real to many people.
Yeah.
To give you an example, nurses, for example, rely on their intuition more than they even realize. When I was in training and even during my internship, I always was smart enough to know I had to make friends with a nurse.
Me too, as an inpatient social worker. The nurse.
Yeah. That's the person that's going to help me survive my day, right? And now actually in science, there's some movement is being measured that even nurse feelings should be a vital sign. It is. You can even search about it. Because how the nurse feels about the outcome is better predictor sometimes than the vital signs.
Oh my God, that is crazy.
And I knew that as a doctor. If a nurse told me, "Hey doc, I'm just not having a bad feeling about this patient," I'm like, "Okay, bring the crash cart." Like,
oh my God, that gives me chills. That is so crazy.
Yes, so it is something, again, in that implicit knowledge, that energetic sensitivity. There's something that with their experience they start developing. They understand the patterns, and they are so caring for their patients that enhances their ability.
Yeah.
And then a very interesting thing happened. I had already started coaching online before COVID, just months before. And then COVID hit. And all of a sudden, I'm working with all these nurses that are crying because they're saying, now I don't know. Now I cannot tell.
Can't tell.
Because this was a new disease that was hitting completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And when before they were able to tell, I don't have to worry about this patient, this is the one I have to worry about. All of a sudden, the one that they thought they didn't have to worry about, I remember when a nurse told me this patient was sitting up, eating Jello, and I'm feeling like, okay, he made it. I don't have to worry about it. So I left him alone and went to attend to another one that seemed more critical. And 5 minutes later, they were calling a code in that room.
Oh.
So this was a big source of stress and heartbreak to our healthcare professionals, because that implicit knowledge that they didn't even know they rely on was not, they did not have experience. In all essence, they were all like first year out of school. They have never seen this. So they were not able to look at their intuition. And many of them lost the sense of competency, because all this is all processed in the subconscious. So when I started training after that and explain about how you can gain access to that, how there's other sources of information that you still can access, and that there is a state that you can train to a shift in your body to be able to access that information, it was such a healing moment.
And what you're saying is, it's fascinating, really. What you're saying is that because this was this foreign thing, and because we were put into a state of stress around it, and it wasn't familiar, and because nurses did not understand that what they were accessing was their intuition all these years, not their training, not their thinking mind, that isn't what was making them successful. It was their intuition. And when this disease came up that they'd never heard of, that we were put in a state of absolute terror around, they made a decision that they didn't know, felt incompetent, and as a result, cut themselves off from their intuition. And so we're not tapping into that until you taught them that this was actually what was causing them to be great at their job. It was there all along. It's still there. It's just that now your body's in a state of stress and you're not accessing it.
Correct.
That is fascinating. That's fascinating.
And to this day, I mean, it's almost 6 years later, we still encounter people that, and even when I talk with nurse managers and explain this, and I'm mentoring them and explain exactly what we just described.
Yeah.
Nurse managers sometimes start crying.
Because they know the power within. They know.
Yeah. And they know how many of their nurses are suffering. And they're like, oh my God. The sense that they have that they're no longer competent is the biggest challenge I have. So to be able to have this power to bring it back and say, like you said, it's still there.
Yeah.
And you can access it. And it's still powerful. And you can do it intentionally. And seeing them regain that sense of competency, that they are able to do it. It's magical. It's really magical. And that's what I think that this topic of intuition, when you invited me, I'm like, oh my gosh, when we're able to access that information, it's just navigating life becomes so much easier.
And it just speaks to how the mind gets in the way. Like how the mind literally just steps in. We've been taught to value that more than anything else, and has the power to just completely get in our way.
Well, I don't even as much as the mind, because we have not the knowledge is there in the mind, is the part of the brain that is acting from automatic and sometimes primitive reflexes.
Yeah.
They were meant to protect us. but and don't give us access to the part of the mind that can be helpful.
Yeah.
So I love my mentor Sheva, and I think that that's the correct attribution source. I don't know where I hear and learn things, but just says not even about that the heart is better than the mind. Is that the heart is the ignition key, so that we can access the part of the mind that we need to access in the moment, and is bringing all the intelligences together and having us being able to access all the information, the seen and the unseen, that non-local that we don't know where it's coming from, for what is most appropriate and effective in the moment, what is going to be more optimal.
And you specialize in trauma. And I would love it if you could speak to that a little bit, your definition of trauma and how this all relates to trauma.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a physician, I was trained to follow the DSM-5 diagnostic manual of trauma and what they diagnose with trauma. But part of my expertise in trauma is actually I had complex trauma. And that I came to understand was the source of a lot of the patterns and reactions I had in the past, was that I had trauma that was not being diagnosed. And in part is because of how we have created a diagnostic system, how we base it. And as I started to dig into it, a lot of our DSM criteria has been developed around some of the people that have the biggest PTSD incidents, which is the military, which, by the way, are mostly males.
Well,
So it is, as many other things in science, something that is very, very gender biased.
and just
And
before you go on, the DSM for our listeners is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Yep, a standard manual.
Yeah. So that's what we're given as physicians and therapists and whatnot, as sort of a book of diagnoses. And they have symptoms, and you can look them up and say, oh, this person has 5 out of these 10 symptoms, and that means they qualify as PTSD or generalized anxiety or all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the education system, the traditional medical and therapeutic education system. Okay, go on.
Correct. Sorry. Yes, thank you for that. My jargon sometimes was. So it was very interesting as I came to my own understanding of my own trauma to not see me described in this diagnostic criteria. So I along with some of the members of the HeartMath healthcare team, have been really putting a lot of resources on how can we diagnose trauma? How can we define it in a more generalized way? Now, you bump into the problem, and actually this was discussed during the latest conversations of the diagnostic criteria, is that if you put it in the most simple terms, which is to be exposed to an emotionally intense event that has not been processed by our nervous system, after COVID, we all made the definition.
Okay.
Right? So it's like, okay, everybody in the United States will meet the definition. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with acknowledging that we all have life experiences that for whatever circumstance, we're stored in our nervous system in an unprocessed way.
Yeah.
And it's not really the instance itself. It's not the event, but it's how we process it. And recent data actually has shown that this was a beautiful article that shows, for example, that a trauma memory is stored in a completely different part of the brain. It's stored in the part of the brain that stores current events. So when we have a trauma memory, it's like we are in that moment, in that it's happening right now.
Right.
Versus a regular memory is stored in a different part of the brain, the back of our brain, and is the kind of the log of our life back there, the historical data. So trauma memories don't go to historical marks; they stay life events that are current. So my my approach to trauma is that we all have little t or big T trauma, that we are all going to have some parts of our life experience that it develops into an unprocessed event emotionally, and that we may start having automatic responses that are primitive in the sense that the only purpose of the response is to protect life and protect us from pain and discomfort. So when we accept that that is how the brain is designed, and that's the correct functioning of the brain, because guess what? When we were in the wild, for where this biology was designed for, if a cobra comes out of the bush and bites me, I don't want to forget that.
Yeah.
I
Right. You have
want that to be very alive, right? So that at the smallest noise in the bush, we run away. So we're not going to let that happen again. So it is conducive to survival. The problem is that when we go in that survival mode, the things that we need the most in the world today, our intuition, our ability to understand, our creative mind, our connection with others, is immediately compromised.
Yeah.
So in our current world, actually is not adaptive how we are responding to those events. And that's why trying to reprogram them through whatever practices, of course, my favorite one is HeartMath, but any practice that really has evidence that helps redirect and reprogram those automatic patterns. Another one I have is EMDR. I'm not a practitioner of it, but one that has very strong evidence. But there are many that show that we have the ability to reprogram those automatic responses and start creating new, more optimal responses. So just understanding that, quite frankly, usually that's my first conversation with somebody that has experienced severe trauma.
Yeah.
And I find it to be so healing.
Yeah. It's the opposite of talk therapy, right? And understanding that this piece, I think that, of understanding your nervous system, right? What you're saying, it's like, oh, this is normal. This is natural. Of course I would do this. My body is doing this because that's what it's built to do. And I can rewire that instead of the self-flagellation around, why am I reacting this way? Why can't I change? All of that kind of stuff. And the talking it through over and over again and drilling in that, that memory, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And with this new research showing where those memories live, I do think that there is hopefully going to be some reconsideration, because that was even my experience. Whenever I will go through the therapy process to process trauma, it became re-traumatizing to me. And now I understand why.
Yeah.
Because where the memory is and how it was triggering the system, I do feel that these are two things that actually change when they go hand to hand. When I became more coherent, when I was able to actually observe the event and be able to process the information of the event, but now from a different physiology, is also a very, very different experience that just allow my brain to be in the experience rather than witnessing the experience. So I always say therapy kept me alive. So I love that I had therapy. And I love to work with therapists because I am just giving them the power to become even more optimal, more effective.
Yeah. The ability to, I think what you're speaking to is that ability to observe, to be that neutral, objective, third-party observer to the experience, rather than being completely connected to the experience in a way that you're running away with your emotions and your physiological response.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so how, I think one of the things that comes up a lot for people is particularly, people who have been traumatized, but really like well, like you say, we all have in some way or another. It depends on how it's processed in the brain and body. But like this question of like, but how do I know? How do I know that's really my intuition? Because there's such a distrust of ourselves. There's such a knee-jerk reaction to, well, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yes, thank you, because that was one of my struggles, right? I had a condition that's called desomatization. I wasn't able to really have an experience of my body. And here there is a technique that's asking me to listen to the heart. You're like, what? I can't even feel my heart. I get to listen to it. Like, that's just my mind making up stories. How do I know? This is the heart speaking.
Yeah, I think that's so common. Like, this is my mind making up stories. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Because that's what I want to hear. That's really what I wanted to hear, right?
Yeah.
So that's normal. Again, it's anything that is new is going to feel as a threat to your body at some point, because our body prefers familiar over optimal. So the first thing I want all your listeners to hear is that if you have doubts, great. That's fantastic. That just means you're accessing a new skill. You're accessing a new source of information. And because it's not familiar, your body is not capable of trusting it right away. So keep practicing. Every attempt is creating the narrow connections for you to have the communication be stronger and stronger. Eventually, what I learned was how I felt after I heard the information and made a decision. And what I mean is the sense of calm and trust that even though if I was not completely sure that I understood why I was supposed to be taking that decision, there was this calm that was different of my previous experience. So to give you an example, and this is real time, when I was the mentee being trained by my mentor, we did an exercise with this tool called freeze frame, which calls into becoming coherent. And I was trying to decide when to fly out of New York after I went to see my daughter's performance. She was doing a ballet intensive in New York. And she was 13 at the time. And it makes sense that I stay a week in New York and flew with her the following week. But my daughter, my oldest daughter, was starting back at school. And I felt like, well, maybe I should be here for her first day of school. I'm like, she's 15. She doesn't really care if I'm here or not. But I kept going back and forward and I couldn't make the decision. And this is something that I always felt very interested on. As an executive, I made decisions that affected millions of people, or I made decisions that were hundreds of millions of dollars and never lost sleep on it. I book a flight and I will not sleep for days. It's like the moment I booked, I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not, the layover is too long, or the layover is too short. That put us there at 8:00. Why didn't I think about that? Like, it was just so stressful. I need a vacation to recover of the stress of planning the vacation. So here I am trying to decide about this flight. And when I did the exercise, and the instruction is just to listen without expectation, I heard very clearly, Sarah needs you. Sarah's my oldest daughter. And I'm like, ridiculous. Like, she's 15. She doesn't care if I'm here, but okay. I literally finished the call, booked the flight to come back on Monday morning. And I felt calm. Pino rehashed information. Pino second guessed the decision. There was just this feeling of calm that took over my body. And not to disclose private information of my now adult daughter, she did need me. And I was glad I was at the gate of the airport in New York when I found out that she needed me. So I was glad I was able to be there within hours of the incident. So that's how you start learning to trust it. It's just, how did you feel when you hear that, and when you may take the action, or when you write it down? Does it feel like it's adding to that feeling of renewal or calming to your body? And I learned to start trusting that feeling the more familiar I became with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always say that if you walk away from something feeling insecure about it, or rehashing it, or worried about it, you probably weren't connected to your intuition over it. You probably made that decision with your mind, because decisions that are made with your intuition come with this sense of groundedness. It might not be what
Mhm.
you wanted. It might not be like, but there's just a knowing, right? So one of the things I know that, we talk about in the HeartMath, and in the training that comes up, is they mention this, having a I mean business attitude around doing the practices. And one of the things that comes up, I think, is because it's we're not trained to do it. We're so habituated into being in a different way. And so it's really, really hard. And so sometimes people have the experience of doing it and nothing happens.
Mhm.
And so can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So in part, that's part of the neural network growing system, right? We need to build it. There are a lot of skills that we shut down along life, or the even connections that are lost along the way with our emotions, with our capacity to feel in, with the capacity to listen to our body, listen to our intuition. So we need to understand that. It's like, sometimes I give the analogy of, if you have not used something, it's like an old county road that nobody has been driving over, and there are trees falling and weeds growing and bushes growing. But when we try with real intent, with that mean business attitude, what happens is we start walking out the weeds and cutting the bush, and kind of get a sense there's a pathway there. That's literally what is happening in your brain. There are neurons that are navigating towards each other, trying to find, okay, what did you mean with this feeling? What do you mean with, like, for me, what inner is? That was very hard for me to get. But every time I really try to feel it, neurons are trying to recreate that pathway. It's starting to rehabilitate, until one day you're like, oh, here is the path. It's so simple. Now I can do it. It exists. So not being able to get into a feeling, not be able to experience it, all is saying that in that moment, that's an inaccessible road. But the fact that you're trying to access the road is creating the road.
So when people are running around in their minds, right, and telling themselves, I need to breathe through my heart, I need to da 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 da, right? That is not a HeartMath practice. That is not the same thing, right, as doing it. That's the mind talking to the mind, right? And so how do you help people understand that that is not the same thing? And
Well, and I think it helps because it happened to me, right? When they told me to focus on the heart, the first thing is like, do I focus in the anatomical heart? Am I focusing in the first one part of the heart, in the apex of the heart? What part of the heart did you want me to focus? Well, the heart is not really in the middle of my chest. Why are you telling me the
how
middle
can
of my
I
chest?
intellectualize this whole thing? Yeah.
So, so the idea of really be present with the heart, it may not be a skill you have in your system because you have been disconnected to it for so long. And it requires sometimes time to reconnect. Just like if you have physical therapy because you broke an ankle and then you're kind of walking funny because your body got used to walking funny. And then you need to reconnect the connection. Actually, my physical therapist gave me this bit of information. It only takes 2 weeks of not using a muscle for the brain to disconnect and forget it exists.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So imagine with emotions.
Yeah.
If we're not using the emotion or if we're not connecting to the heart, it may take us some time. So we have some rehab techniques and things that can help instead of trying to let you spiraling into where you're doing good or not.
Yeah.
The first thing I do is just reflect what I hear the person say. Because what I hear in that shatter and that spiraling is that you really want to do this. That you really care about doing it right, that you're seeking the experience. And that for me is the first thing.
It's
Just
beautiful.
recognize
Yeah.
the care behind that.
Yeah.
And honoring your mind that is desperately trying to use the highways that it has available to find a route. It's like we just gave them a GPS for a freeway that is not in the map update, right? we need to update the map.
I'm like, where is it? Where is it? Yeah.
Exactly. I need the exit. It's not like, where is it, right?
Yeah.
So by honoring that you're just spinning because your mind and your heart wants it so much that you really want to do this. And then I have a couple of exercises. One is touch your chest area so that you create sensory input and focus on the sensory input. Sometimes for people, you cannot have your hand there all the time because eventually I want you to be able to do it anywhere. Just if you just casually tap your chest. And I do that even when I practice.
Yep.
Now, don't do it when you have a microphone in a conference because then you hit the microphone. I learned that. Even the word bring your attention to the heart for people like me, which don't have a full relationship with their body, can be challenging. So sometimes I play games and tell them like, okay, I become aware of your right foot. And now your left knee. And now your left elbow and your right hand. And actually cross the midline. That helps something in the brain.
Yeah.
It creates a brain activity that is very particular. And then now focus on the heart. So it starts creating a mapping of the body and help them map so that they have access to that awareness.
And these are things that can be done every day, right? These are things that can be done to access the intuition every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be for big travel decisions or big relationship decisions. And you're going to think I'm very vain, and this is the authentic me. So yeah, maybe I am. But one of my big energy drains used to be what I'm going to wear.
I'm sure no one can relate to that.
I used to spend so much time looking and thinking, and then it didn't matter what I chose. I would spend the rest of the day just like, I should have not worn these shoes. I knew I didn't remember I needed to walk. Oh, this skirt is too short. I cannot sit in, and I'm going to be on stage and I have to sit. Like, it didn't matter. I will be criticizing all day long, whatever I had decided. So that was a big energy drain in my system. So like one of the things that I use my intuition for is to decide what to wear. So I just first go and I was like, how do I want to feel today? And then, for example, for today, I knew I was meeting you and I was like, I want to feel grounded and lovely and accessible and pretty. And then that's the clothes just started pulling up. I'm like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to wear my hair. And it just becomes very clear. And then I feel that I made the perfect decision every time I do that, even when it seems strange that something pops up.
Well, and then it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Right. Like it literally doesn't matter because you feel so grounded in what you chose that there's no reason to take anybody's temperature, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you know what I love about this community too is, you know, I mean, I've had a few interviews earlier this week where I can tell that the person's like crashing in and they're, you know, really stressed. And so I'll do a little heart coherence, you know, hey, let's start this way. And then today I was crashing in and you were like, hey, let's do a little heart coherence. I was like, oh, good idea. You know? I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much. I'd love to hear, is there any advice that or anything else that you would like to leave our audience with, or even, what you think the meaning of intuition really is, what you think it really is?
hmm So I actually think that if there were only one thing I want people to remember, is that intuition is a gift we all have to access information that allow us to be in the most optimal way to respond to the world and navigate the world. And that we can train our body to access that information on a demand basis. It is not something for me that is optional. That is really when we try to navigate ignoring or not accessing intentionally our intuition, we're really navigating with one arm tied to our backs. And it's such a complex world where it's impossible for us to digest all the information that's coming at us. Intuition of even what we need is what is going to make the difference of how we experience this world. Today, I actually was watching some leadership videos, and one of the experts I listened to was saying that the difference between somebody stuck in middle management and be able to move to upper management is the ability to have discernment, to really discern what is really important.
Yeah.
And I don't know about your inbox, Ari, but mine has 600 messages coming a day. And without discernment to quickly find what is important for me to pay my attention, or to distinguish what is really adding to what I need in my life.
Yeah.
I just don't know how I will navigate the world today without that. So I hope that your listeners really cherish their intuition and cultivate the skills to access it more and more frequently.
Yeah. Well, man, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Sandra. And I'm going to have all your information in the show notes for people who want to know how to get in touch with you. Yeah, that's a great note to end on.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all you're doing in the world. Truly amazing that you are creating these spaces and communicating to so many people.
Thank you. Right back at you.